Hi, and welcome to the Agile in Action podcast with Bill Raymond, where I'm joined by Paulo Caroli. Hi, Paulo. How are you today?
Hey, Bill. Fantastic. Really nice to be here.
I'm looking forward to our conversation. We're going to talk about why retrospectives are the most important elements for teams. Paulo Caroli, you are an advisor at Thoughtworks. You are the author of a few books, including Fun Retrospectives. And we're going to talk about that today. But before we get started, could you share a little bit more about yourself?
When I think about myself, I consider me as an early adopter of agile methodologies. Back on the days, I was a developer, and I was one of those developers that felt like, hey, I can do a better job. I should facilitate this retrospective or facilitate that inception. And that's where my experience and, in fact, my whole career came about. And the books, including Fun Retrospectives, that we're going to talk about, and my other book, Leanception, which has to do with inceptions.
You were nice enough to let me get a copy of your book so I can read it. The book is great. It is so fun to read, and it's really clear and concise how you can really run a retrospective and make it fun at the same time. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Now, before we get into it, we've talked about frameworks, including Scrum, which you kind of base retrospectives off in your book. But one of the things that we want to do today is drill down into this retrospective concept. I think it would probably be good to ground ourselves in what the Scrum framework is. So let's go ahead and ground ourselves in those events, artifacts, and roles that the Scrum framework prescribes so that we can then talk about retrospectives.
Sure. I'm very thankful for Scrum because they made retrospects very famous, right? They exist before Scrum, but Scrum definitely put those in everybody's agenda. So whenever I think about Scrum, I always remind myself the 3-5-3, three roles: product owner, the person responsible for giving the direction, the strategic direction for the product; Scrum master, the person that has experience with Scrum. In fact, kind of the facilitator. Several times the Scrum master would be the retrospect facilitator; and developer, a member of the development team that will make the product, the service happen. Those are the three roles. You have the 5 events. Thank you for this, Scrum. So first one of them, they call the event, but it is the sprint, the cadence that we're going to follow, weekly or bi-weekly. And then at the beginning of your sprint, you have the sprint planning meeting where we decide what is the goal for this sprint and the backlog of work. At the end of the sprint, you have the sprint review meeting where we review how did you go about our goal, our sprint goal, and the items that we said we would accomplish. Once per sprint, you should do a retrospective, which is the Kaizen moment. Is the moment to stop and look for improvement. What should we improve? Because we're going to work sprint by sprint, so we better be continuously improving ourselves. That's the retrospect. And the last event, the daily scrum. A quick meeting usually was standing up when it was presential. We would quickly talk about what we did yesterday, what we're doing today, and do we have any blockers. And Scrum also have the 3 artifacts. The first one being the product backlog, the high-level backlog of work, the roadmap that we're going to do for the product. You have the increment. What is the next increment for this product? Many people work with MVP, for example, or a small increment or hypothesis thing that we're going to validate. That's the increment. And the third one being the sprint backlog. What is the backlog of work for the next sprint we're going to work on? Many times the sprint backlog is more detailed. The product backlog is like a roadmap in higher level of information.
Great. Thank you very much for that. So now let's drill into what that retrospective is meant to accomplish.
Yes. So retrospect, first, that term existed before Scrum. It was very common that at the end of a project, we would do a retrospective about the project. Sometimes we'd call it the post-mortem. From Lean as well, we call it Kaizen. And retrospect was the Kaizen moment. It's a moment to look for continuous improvement because we must be continuously improving how we work. And Scrum made it famous because when they said there's 5 events, they're super important. I really like that they said retrospect is one of them. So once per sprint, we should stop and look for improvement. So retrospective is a moment where the team stops and talk about improvement, especially because the team's working continuously week after week. So we gotta be improving. That's what we do as human beings, especially teams, group of people working together. We gotta be improving week by week.
What you're saying is basically it's however, whatever your cadence is for your sprints. So if you're doing a release for your product every week, then you do a retrospective every week. If it's every 2 weeks, you do one every 2 weeks. Is that accurate?
Looking from the Scrum point of view, yes. But as a matter of fact, I don't care if you're using Scrum, Kanban, none of the above. You should always be looking for improvement. So that's why many times I say week by week, because every week we should be looking for improvements.
Mhm.
Maybe that's too much of a cadence for your team. Do it every other week. I wouldn't advocate for do it only at the end of the project. That's a postmortem. Like the name saying, it's dead, it's over. So you're not improving, you're just talking about what happened in the past. When you do it continuously, week by week, you're seriously looking for improvement because you might be looking back and also looking ahead. That's how I like to look for retrospects, not only in the perspective of being a Scrum meeting, but it's a moment to look for improvements. And we should have those moments quite often.
But there's also a little bit more than just improvements, aren't there? Is there some element of looking back at what was accomplished as well?
Yes, that's the most common style where we stop and look back. It's let's look back in these 2 weeks that we worked together towards this goal and talk about, hey, what went well, what did not go so well, and if you have any new ideas for the next period. I think that's the most common format of retrospective. And when you say the word retrospect, I think that's what comes to everybody's mind. What went well, not so well, and if there is any new idea for moving forward.
When we're looking at what we can change, like how big are these things? Are we looking at the big things that we need to tackle? Like, for example, we need to change an entire infrastructure in order to enable all these new customers coming on board? Or is it smaller things that you can accomplish in the next few weeks?
That's a good question. In fact, thank you for asking this because when you got to think about something big, so there's a new platform, big thing we got to change, it's not a retrospect. Like you need the inception, you need a larger workshop. When I think about retrospect, in my mind, I have a time frame of about 1 hour. If it's a long period I haven't done for a while, maybe 2 hours. More than this is way too tiring. But if you're talking about it's a whole new product, a platform, a big change we got to make, we're talking about here I don't even use the word meeting. It's a large workshop. It's a multi-day workshop that we need to talk about it. For me, that goes in another bucket. It's more like in the bucket of discoveries or inceptions, where we figure out what are the things we gotta do to move forward. Retrospects for me goes in the bucket of let's do it continuously, very often. So we talk about the small things we can do to accomplish large improvements.
Yeah, I was just in a meeting with a team of developers recently in their retrospective, and one of the things that came up was this whole concept of making it's a US-based product that they were building with English speakers, but it's becoming more popular in other countries. And so they did not have this whole concept of localization and internationalization and things like that. And so I know that they are having a big working session to figure out what does that look like for the product. But I did see in the meeting, in the retrospective, they said it's still possible for us to take things like error messages and text that appears on the screen and format them slightly differently so that they will be, if you will, more localization ready. And so their decision in the retrospective was to just start doing that on new work so that they could start implementing something that led them to that new path without really, if you will, breaking their process in too big of a way.
No, that's a really good example because the topic itself showed up in the retrospective. If it is a small topic, you talk about it, you close it, create a Jira ticket or whatever it is that's small in the retrospective itself. If it is a larger topic, it foster a conversation or another meeting or to schedule a whole workshop to handle it. But the topic itself, because it is a team meeting to look for improvement, showed up in the retrospect. Hey, we didn't know we're expanding we're being more successful than what we would. Now the Brazilians are using this amazing digital product. They speak Portuguese. What should they do? This shows up in the retrospective. We have the conversation and probably move forward to another item that shows up in the retrospective, right?
It all sounds great. A team gets together, they talk about their wins, they talk about what they're going to accomplish in the next few sprints or what some bigger topics are that they need to move into another meeting or another workshop. But in order to do this, it sounds very mechanical sometimes. And there are concerns within the team. Sometimes people are stressed out because there was a lot of work to be done. There's still more work to be done in the next 2 weeks. There are maybe people that aren't necessarily working that well together. And this kind of feels like a time and a place to help coalesce that team a little bit better. And I think that's your perspective from the Fun Retrospectives book. So, can you talk a little bit about maybe what a bad retrospective looks and then maybe how you can improve upon that? We'll get into the improvements in
Yeah.
just a minute.
You touch a point that's very important. Scrum says, and I'm advocating for having a retrospect every week or every sprint. If you make it mechanical, it's going to be very boring. Let's say every week we do, oh, what was well, not so well, new ideas, or not so well, new ideas. It's boring. Fifth time you call me for the same style of retrospect, it's like I'm bored out. Another thing that can make it boring and mechanical is if you only focus on the product, on the work items. Work items, sprint planning, sprint review, it's all about the work items. But when you talk about retrospective, it's got to be about the people, the process, the product. It's everything. It's all the improvements, whatever makes sense at that moment in time. So I'll give an example of one retrospect that went really bad. We're doing a normal Scrum team, right? And then I go there to facilitate a retrospective, and we're talk about the stories, story points, the work we didn't finish this week, and the other. Put all this in the plan of the retrospect. I use a simple format, not so well new ideas. But guess what happened? That week, at the beginning of the week, the CEO was fired. What's the point of neglecting the current context and talk about, hey, what went well, not so well, new ideas for the product? Nothing at all. There is an elephant in the room. Guess what? Let's talk about the elephant in the room because we are a team working for this organization. Something really big happened. We should talk about it. That's a retrospect. It's not only about, oh, let's only talk about the work. Oh, let's only talk about not so well related to the work items and news stories. No, it's human beings talking. It's not machines or robots or GPT and AI figuring out how to code for us. It's human beings. We need to acknowledge the emotions.
That's a really good point. I was just in a retrospective. This is just at the end of last year. We were very rushed to get some work complete due to budgetary reasons, let's be honest. Anytime you get down to the November and December time period, there's those last things that people have the budget money to fit into their work. And so that's what that was. We were trying to get the work done so quickly that there were a lot of process things that we needed to add in order for this to go smoothly. For example, when you write code, sometimes what you need to do is write a test associated with it to make sure that, let's say, if the user clicks on the button, or maybe they tap on a button, or they use a mouse, or they use their eyes nowadays with vision-based products, you have to test to make sure that button works effectively. That's just a simple example. There are some bigger issues there. The point of the matter is that we weren't writing these tests, and those tests result in a lower quality product. And we started to see that happen. And so one of our retrospectives just focused on um, let's figure out how we're going to get testing incorporated into the process again. It's something we've been doing, but we've been neglecting it because we've been moving so fast. And part of that ended up escalating to leadership saying, you're asking us to move too quickly, you're going to lose quality, that's going to impact the customers. But I thought that was a really good retrospective where we veered off the path of, oh, what's coming up next to how do we address some issues that could be bigger in the long term.
Another great example, Bill, and I hope you did this in retrospect, not 1 year after the fact, not even 1 month, maybe 1 week after the fact, or like, wow, in retrospect for that decision of not writing the test, it's already hurting us. But if you did this every week, you're like, as soon as when it's not even a problem, something starts to bother you and you handle it before it becomes an issue. That's amazing. I hope in retrospect is in a short period. So there is no accumulation of things that can become a big issue for the team.
Yeah, and that's what I wanna ask you about. This is gonna be my first question relating to that, because it really struck me that the reason for why we had this issue come up a few retrospectives later is because the team was so overworked. They knew that this was happening, but it didn't bubble up. It did not turn into a conversation, so people were aware that this wasn't happening. So what is it that a team needs to do in order to make sure that those types of conversations occur at the moment as opposed to later on?
as a facilitator or as someone that's going to think about the agenda of the retrospective, you got to think about what should be the context for this retrospective. And then you got to select the proper activity for it. For example, let's say the team morale is very low. You got to select activities for acknowledgement, for thank you. I'll give you an example. The team morale is low. So let's do a 360 positive feedback. So go in the room, look around, take 20 minutes. Write a positive thing about each one of your colleagues. Everybody has to do this. And then after the fact, make a circle, put one colleague in the center, and then everybody reads to that colleague what they wrote about the colleague. Do this for everybody. That's it. That's a retrospective. You increase team morale because for some reason team morale was low. So imagine this scenario. Team morale is low, and then use that retrospective to talk about the problem we had in production last week. What's going to happen? Team morale is going to go even lower. Sad people works much worse than happy people, That's the thing. You got to think about the context of the retrospect. Or in your example, hey, we have changed some process because of the deadline. I have a feeling those shortcuts might be hurting us. So you select the activity that talks about the things we're doing or not doing. For example, the starfish. What did they do well, not so well? We should improve, do more of, less of. You put that format, probably someone's going to say more of automated testing. But that's a choice that you did. Okay, I think if I selected that activity, that's probably going to foster that conversation. And maybe the context of your retrospective got to be this. Hey, it's mid-November. Our deadline is coming soon. We know we had to cut some corners. Let's talk about it. And then you put an activity that shows more of, less of. Basically, you as an organized facilitator are inviting this kind of conversation. So the whole structuring and building the agenda for the retrospective is very important for what you want to get out of this meeting.
And I think hats off to the Scrum Master for doing something along those lines and basically saying, I think there might be a problem coming up here, and let's talk about it. Sometimes they're, what do we call them? Elephants in the room. They're the things that you know aren't going right, but just aren't spoken.
Let me give you another example, which is a common issue in retrospectives. Let's say you're in a team of 10 people, only one tester that's really concerned about it, and the other 9 people, they're not concerned about it, right? And then you select as a filtering activity, the most common in retrospective, everybody writes their notes on the board, and you do dot voting. Only the tester votes for that thing on the quality. The rest of the team doesn't vote about it, doesn't get selected, boom, doesn't show up until it's really bad and becomes a huge issue. On that case, you as a retrospect facilitator, Scrum Master, Agile coach, whatever it is, by selecting that filtering activity dot voting, which looks like a good one, was a really bad choice. Perhaps you can change the filtering activity. Let's say use one, there's one that I call select one and talk. You just go around the room, round robin, and say select one and talk. This way, it's not about the democracy, it's about what each person want to talk about. Maybe you can do only one around the room, but that tester is going to select that thing that's really important and you'll talk about it. It's a small change in the retrospective agenda. I just changed the filtering activity from dot voting to select one and talk. And then that problem was covered.
That's a great example. In your book, you cover, and I don't know if we're going to have time to cover all of them, but you cover the 7-step agenda. You have energizers to check in, team building, retrospectives, future spectives. I like that term, filtering and checkout. Can you, I don't know if we want to go through all 7 of those or if you'd like to combine those and share why you feel those are so important for a retrospective.
I'll go through it because I always have in my mind, like whenever I'm organizing a retrospective, I always think, okay, 7 steps, 7 steps. First one, what is the context? It's really important. Your retrospect is not just a meeting in the calendar. It must have a context. Some things happen. What is the context? The context is like, hey, let's look back at that really bad production issue we had and let's retrospect only about that thing. Or let's have a retrospect about how you're feeling about the CEO being fired. Or in 3 weeks, we got to release to production. So to be honest, let's not retrospect and look at the future. What should you do from today to 3 weeks? Or another example, it's just a new assembled team. Let's get to know each other. We're going to use that meeting that's in the calendar called retrospective, but it is a team building and put this in the context. So that's the context. Everybody knows the retrospective prime directive by Norm Keith, regardless of what happened really through believe that everybody did the best that they could, but all this really important. It's important to read it out loud, the prime directive. So you put people in the room with the spirit of participating of a retrospect, accepting that people did the best that they could. But that prime directive makes sense for a retrospect. If I'm talking about the future, regardless of what happened, doesn't make sense. In the book or in the website for retrospects.com, we have a prime directive for future spec. Also, if you're going to use that time to do a team building activity, it's about team building. We also have another prime directive for that. Context 2, select the prime directive. 3, super important, run a quick energizer. Less than 5 minutes, break the ice. Why is this so important? Because we come from work like I'm coding user story. I'm fixing a bug. You want to break the ice so we come to another state of mind about continuous improvement, not only about the work. So energizers are great for this. And maybe you select energizer that has some meaning behind the scenes. They're great energizers for this. And this was step 3. You did all those 3 in less than 5 minutes, 5, 6, 7 minutes. The next one's check-in. You got to select a very quick activity so you can get a feeling how people are feeling right now as they enter the room. The most common one, safety check, to check if people are safe to talk in public amongst themselves about something. After the check-in is the main course. It's the main activity you're going to select to gather data or to let people have conversation. Then along with the main course, 6th one that goes in my mind is the filtering. How we're going to handle that conversation, how you're going to filter down, because usually a lot of things show up. And then the last one, check out. You're about to leave the room. Before you leave, okay, what are the next steps? Sometimes next steps look for action items. Sometimes next steps just to acknowledge the conversation we had. But those are the 7 steps I think about. And the main course, it varies depending. I'm looking back. Is it really a retrospective? I'm looking forward. It is a futurespective. Or do I just want to do a team building activity? So for main course in the website, instead of having main course, I have 3 categories: retrospective, futurespective, and team building for this reason.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It's really going in with the expectation that you know exactly what's going to be covered in that session.
Exactly. The selection of the main course probably has to do with the context, what you had selected for the context. What is a good main course activity to foster that conversation or to gather data from the things you want on the context?
I was thinking about icebreakers. Do you have any of those?
So, icebreaker and energizers. If you're in a corporate meeting, you want it to be fast. You want to be fun and fast. So, you got to be careful not to delegate it because everybody knows some fun activity, right? So, you got to be careful because some of those take too long to explain and to follow up. And sometimes they don't make much sense in the context. So, a simple one, increment by 1. Let's do both of us together. Imagine like we're a group of 10 people. I'm going to tell the rules. So, I'm going to start. I'm going to say the number 1. Someone else has to increment by 1 and say the next number. Someone else increment by 1 and say the next number. We cannot raise the hands or do any facial expression. If 2 people say the same number at the same time, we go back to number 1. Let's see how far can we go. I'm going to put on my clock, only 1 minute. Go. 1,
2,
3, 4.
4, 4. Oh, we both did it.
There you go. That's it. You laugh. That's enough. Move forward. Maybe that energizer is good. Let's say we're a remote team and we had a lot of problems with remote communication. That's a good energizer to talk about the importance. Hey, do you know what? You got to raise your hand to do what, talk on Slack, whatever it is to gather each other attention. So on the site, there are quite a few energizers like this. You want something that might have a message and it's simple to understand and it is fast.
The other thing that I'd like to talk to you about is this safety check-in. I like this energizer idea, but what do we do in order to make sure that everyone is safe in the room?
That's a really important question. In fact, safety is so important that we should try to create and maintain and foster a safe environment during the whole day, right? Not only in the retrospective. But being the retrospective, a meeting that people talk about emotions and problems that happen, look for improvements, you definitely got to make sure that's a safe environment. So the first thing you do is the context. The second thing is the prime directive. You're going to spend 1 minute reading it out loud and reminding people, look, it's a safe place. Regardless of what happened, we truly believe that everybody did the best they could. You got to read that message out loud. Say, we're supposed to be in a safe environment. Then the energizer is great because it breaks the ice. And remind us that we're human beings, that we laugh as we did as when we were kids. All the energizers you can use with kids because we were more fun when we were kids and make friends again. After that, you have the check-in activity. You might want to choose the safety check. The safety check is one of the possibilities as a check-in. That one explicitly asks, how safe are you in this group to talk about anything that shows up? 5 being, I'm super safe. I'll talk about each and every topic. 4, maybe some things I won't talk about. 3, half of the things. And 1, I don't feel safe at all. Of course, this activity has to be anonymously. And you as a facilitator have to know how to handle it because if things show up as low safety, guess what? Maybe the agenda you have thought about is not a good agenda anymore, you know? The safety is important, but if you use the safety check, it is important that you know how to handle it as well. Don't just use because you read in the book, it's there. Okay, let's move forward to the next thing. No, you got to acknowledge, if safety is low and do something about it.
What's an example of where you saw the safety was low and had to do something about it?
I'll give you 2 bad examples and one which I think is more appropriate. One bad example from a facilitator. It has in her mind the agenda I want to go about, and then safety is medium and low. She says, okay, this was a safe check. Let's go to the next activity. What's the point? People just said, I'm not feeling safe, so the important topics are not going to show up. So basically, you neglect people's feelings and move forward with your agenda. So that for me, it's a bad outcome. One that happened before was really disastrous. I was traveling, in fact, to San Francisco. This was back in Brazil, back in the days. And people are doing a whole retrospective on the office space. And the facilitator asked the safe check, and the safety was low. It was a presential retrospective. And then the facilitator said, as safety is low, and we want to keep it anonymous, I'm going to create an anonymous board and send the link, go back to your laptops and fill it up. Really bad decision because safety was low for some reason. And then that reason ended up on non-polite messages anonymously written on a board. And one non-polite message get on top of another non-polite message, and then the whole thing of looking for continuous improvement, you're getting the opposite effect. So that was another bad outcome of the safety is anonymous, but not what comes after. And now that we give an example, when I came across that situation, what did I do? I have an agenda in my mind. Oh, I'm going to ask the safety check. It's going to show everybody super safe. I'll move forward to the activity to gather data. I run the safety check. I'm surprised safety is low. So I need to say out loud, guess what? I had another activity in mind, but now I'm going to change. The name of this activity now is creating safety. So please put yourself in the shoes of the person, we don't know because it was anonymous, but put yourself in the shoes of the people that put a 3 or 2 not feeling safe. What are the things that you think might be happening that it's making that colleague not feel safe? Write it down on a yellow post-it. Put on the board. Let's cluster it. Okay, it's more difficult as a facilitator because you should not comment. Maybe read and cluster, but don't comment because it is a situation that's uncomfortable. Now you repeat the question. Before commenting about those clusters, you repeat the question. Okay, now pick that, I don't know, pink post-it, a different color. Write down the things you think we should be doing as a team to help overcome that thing that was making that person feels unsafe. Cluster, read it out loud. That's about it. You change the agenda, but it's not even that you attacked the elephant in the room because you had no clue what was in the room, but there is something there. But you gave people the chance to talk about something that's uncomfortable and how to fix it without saying, I'm the one that was feeling uncomfortable. Yeah, that's a great example of how to handle a situation where safety checks low.
Thank you for that. I think that's super important. And what you're saying is you had set the context for the meeting, but the safety check was low. So you just shifted gears and you said, we're going
Yeah.
to do this other thing instead. I'm thinking about who facilitates these meetings. And that's been a topic of conversation on this podcast quite a few times. One of the things that I've heard people say, well, I'm a proponent of the Scrum Master being the person that leads the retrospective, and then other people saying we should have the facilitator. Sometimes we don't have the budget for a
Mm.
facilitator, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you manage the facilitation of a meeting like this. Who should be responsible? And what is it? What might you do if you don't have someone that can come in as an independent voice?
Another really good and common question, right? Of course, if you have the budget and the luxury to call an external facilitator, or if you know the situation is very difficult, you might have to call an expert on facilitating difficult situations. But we're talking about normal teams, day to day, week after week, sprint after sprint. Sometimes you cannot have an external facilitator, many times, right? And sometimes you don't even have a scrum master. It's several teams that are very advanced. They're just like amazing performing teams that they don't need a scrum master or a coach. They're amazing performing teams. But they do have the benefit of having continuous improvement. So what they can do is figure out the agenda. One of them decide the agenda based on the current context the team is going through, and have the step-by-step in the agenda. So there's not one person facilitating, but say, okay, in 1 minute, let's just verify the context is correct. Someone reads the context, that's fine. Okay, who else can read now the prime directive? That's fine. Okay, so now Mary's gonna run an energizer. Of course, you talk to Mary. Mary, can you run a quick energizer? She said yes. Mary ran the energizer in 3 minutes. And then someone else, okay, we had select here check-in activity. Read out loud. This is the check-in activity. That's how we run it and run it. So basically, you're reading the script. So there's not one person facilitating, but you're following a script. Especially on the main course, if you only have 30 minutes, you got to say, look, we only have 30 minutes. So let's gather data for 5 minutes. We cluster or whatever is the filtering style you're going to do. And then we have 20 minutes left, 5 minutes per topic, only 4 topics. Those things, write it down on the board so we know it's 5 minutes, we need to switch topics. And then you took care of the retrospective did happen without having one facilitator, but there was a thoughtful agenda for running it. It becomes more difficult if you don't have a thoughtful agenda on it, right? If it's just hey, it's on the calendar, let's go retrospective, it's harder to facilitate because then it's a bunch of people sitting in the room, look at each other, say, okay, let's talk. So it's that's more dangerous or less effective.
As we are wrapping up on the podcast here, you are a big proponent of retrospectives, obviously, and it's something that you enjoy. What are some of the things that can make a retrospective a little bit more fun?
Acknowledge people. We are human beings. Bring the first thing is team building. If you are running retrospectives, consider adding as main course some of the team building activities. And several of those are really fun. When you share personal facts, we gotta learn about each other. It's fun. I didn't know that, I don't know, you play chess or you play guitar, that have 5 dogs and 1 cat. Those things are fun. Those are the things that when I go to the water cooler, I will start that conversation before asking you about the bug. So add activities that are more fun, lighthearted, and activities that foster the thank you word between people. That's super important because as we work together, we know that we'll focus about work, we'll talk about the bugs, the issue. That's going to happen, unfortunately, naturally. The things that don't happen naturally, it's for me to share with you that I have 3 kids and I am allergic to cats and this kind of stuff. So those things you can add to the retrospectives because then you're forming a team, people that knows each other, they're going to work better together. And then you make a more fun retrospective and a more fun and effective work environment.
Paulo Caroli, if anyone wants to reach you, how might they do so?
Well, LinkedIn is my house on the beach. Whenever I'm looking around, I'm at LinkedIn and I reply to it quite promptly. My website, paulocaroli.com, is just a summary of who I am. And I blog quite often on caroli.org. And of course, for the retrospective stuff, it's on funretrospectives.com.
Great. If you are listening right now on your podcast app, go down to the show notes and you'll see the links there to reach out to Paulo Caroli. And if you are on YouTube, that'll be down in the description. And of course, the transcripts along with the links are always on the agileinaction.com website. Paulo Caroli, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Bill. A pleasure to be here. And keep on doing amazing podcasts. I love listening to your stuff, man. Really
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Agile in Action podcast with Bill Raymond. Subscribe now to stay current on the latest trends in team organization and agile techniques. Please take a moment to rate and comment to help us grow our community. This podcast is produced in affiliation with Cambermast LLC, and our executive producer is Riyama Dagason. If there is a topic you would like Bill to cover, contact him directly at bill.raymond@agileinaction.com.